Hi everyone, I'm super excited to host Jeff Echols, who is serving as Chief Innovation Officer at various AEC firms. But if you are in AEC Tech LinkedIn community, you have highly came across Jeff's post on tech content, branding, and everything. So I'm super excited to get you on the show.
Oh, thanks, Mar. I really appreciate you having me on. We've known each other for quite a while now, and it's always fun to connect and compare notes and learn from each other. So I'm here to learn as much from you as I am to share. So we'll see where this goes.
Amazing. Jeff, for people who don't know about your career and background, what would be the top three career highlights?
Top three career highlights. I think with a career as varied as mine, starting in architecture, and then now not doing. I haven't done architecture. Put that in quotes. I haven't drawn a line since like 2014 or something like that. Uh, there are probably a lot of people that know of me that don't know that is my background. In 2012, a firm that I co-founded, we won Firm of the Year in Indiana, where I actually live. So we won Firm of the Year, and that's got to be a highlight. But I think really where I am right now, providing fractional chief innovation officer services or innovation guidance to firms in AEC really is exciting to me because it's a culmination of everything that I've done over the course of my career. I've worked in architecture, I've done startups, I still teach, and like you said, I've got courses out there and podcasts out there on branding and business development and other things, and all of this culminates in this idea that right now I call the culture of growth, and that's what's necessary to fuel innovation, competitive innovation for AEC firms. So I don't know if I hit three highlights in there necessarily, but that's a snapshot at least of where I've been.
Like you have so many different hats. What has been the most difficult career choice?
That's a really interesting question because I've spent a lot of my career. I want to be careful how I say this because I don't want to offend anybody or downplay anything, but I've spent a lot of my career, I'll say, giving. I still host a show every morning. I host a show called, well, the audience renamed it to Java with Jeff, but it was originally called Our Morning Mindset. It's a show where I talk about growth mindset and mindfulness and emotional intelligence, and that in a way is a follow-on to a show that I did for 3 years that I launched with Mark R. LePage, the founder of Entree Architect. Back at the beginning of COVID, we said, hey, people are going to need a place. They're going to want a place to connect. So we launched a show that eventually became known as Context and Clarity. And so I ran that show for 3 years to the day. The last show is 3 years to the day after the first show. And it was a daily show. And there was an aspect of it once a week where I would interview people. I don't even remember now how many guests, but there's 100 and some guests on that show over the years. And, a lot of that was a labor of love, right? It was giving to a community, and that's hard, right? As a business person to say, okay, I'm going to do this out of love for this community. I'm going to do this because I have the ability, I have the skill set, I have the connections, I have the network, I have the knowledge to do all these things, and I'm just going to give it away. And ironically, the harder part is walking away from that. Right. The hardest part was not doing it. It was walking away from that. It was shutting it down. I needed to shut that down for a number of reasons, and many people in that community understand what those reasons were. But at that point in time, I needed to shut that down. And that, I think, was harder than showing up day after day after day. And this is not a complaint at all, but not getting paid, volunteering to do this and do all these things. And I even look at it now, in the chapter of career and life that I'm in now. And I'm still really good friends with Mark. He and I talk pretty much every week, and we're still exploring things that we can do together. And so now our decisions are, can you go back and do those types of things at that level, or is there something else? And what things that we're talking about and what we're working on are something else, right? That are not as much volunteer efforts. But yeah, I think that's the big irony is you get involved in things that feed your soul And it's hard. I think one, it's hard to walk away from those things. And maybe two, it's hard to see the pivot. Right. Okay. Well, does it have to be a walk away? Is there some other version of this? The what's next? And I think all of us would be smart to say, in the what's next, how do I hang on to the bits and pieces of that fed my soul, and that obviously return value for other people that I really appreciate, and just absolutely am grateful for the community, the people that I've met through that I've connected with through that. My birthday was earlier this year, and my girlfriend organized a surprise birthday party, and many of those people came in from around the country and surprised me at the coffee shop that I walk to every morning. We walked over there, and there's a whole crowd of them packed into the coffee shop that I walk to every morning. You cannot replace that. Those are friends. Those are loved ones. Those are practically family members. And so, I think part of what we need to do as human beings in the way that we work, in the way that we live, is say, hey, this thing that I'm doing now may not serve me the way that it did when I first started this, and that's fine. But what's next? What's the pivot? What do I do now that continues, or that serves me in a new way, I guess would be a better way to say that, and continues to feed my soul, and even continues to connect with these people, if there's a way to keep doing that. And that's one of life's great conundrums. How do you do that? But that's been one of the hardest things over the years, is wow, why not just keep doing this? At some point you can't sustain all of those things. So that's probably the hardest.
And from architecture role with technical skills to running a business, running a community, what were like the new skills you developed? How did you build that? What's your playbook of getting into this roles and becoming good at it?
Yeah, I think, as I've taken a little bit of time in the past month or two to really kind of reflect on where I've been, and what I'm doing now in the fractional chief innovation officer type role is really a culmination. I think I might have said this earlier, but it's really a culmination of everything that I've done, right? I went to architecture school. I've got a couple of degrees, and I'll still teach in architecture school. But my path, just like a mastermind group that I started a year and a half ago or so, was for early and mid-career professionals. It was really for people in engineering and architecture and construction that said, hey, I don't necessarily want to be a quote unquote architect in that traditional sense. And that comes a little bit from a few years ago. The first time I first started teaching in graduate school, and then the university asked me if I would add an undergrad section, and I did, and I was curious. When I taught that first undergrad class, I was asking the students, okay, you're 4 years into architecture school now. What is it that interests you? What do you want to do with this education? And almost none of them said anything about playing that traditional architect role. I want to go be an architect the way it's traditionally defined. They, of course, they're young, and they have access to great tools, and they have great skills around digital creation and all kinds of things. So things like that. There was discussion of building envelope design. There's all kinds. Everybody talked about something that's related, certainly, but almost nobody in that traditional role, the way we talked about it 120 years ago when I was in school, right? And so this early and mid-career mastermind group was really created for those people, and those people like me. And I co-founded that with KP Reddy, and he's similar, right? He's educated and trained as a civil engineer, but he doesn't do civil engineering. And so we have all these people that do all of these things that are non-traditional when it comes to their education, if we say it that way. And so for me, it's always been leaving myself open for exploration. My first job out of school was in a really bad economy. I learned to not like going to work on Fridays because that's when they laid people off. So I was in Chicago. I'd get on the train every Friday morning and go, okay, well, is this my last train ride? Is is this the day that I'm going to get laid off? And so because of that atmosphere, I would go in on Saturdays and learn new skills, learn new software and things like that. And so it's always been this process of continual learning for me. But I think one of the things that I've been really, really good at over the years is one, pattern recognition, and two, being able to see things and apply them in different ways. And there's a book that I reference a lot that's called, I think the author is Stephen Johnson. I may have that wrong, but it's called Where Do Good Ideas Come From? The Natural History of Innovation. And I read that, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, maybe something like that. And one of the things that the author talks about in the book is the fact that most innovation that we see is not this big leap. It's not this huge innovative change. He talks about this idea of near adjacencies. And an example that he uses is, I don't know where this is, but I'm here in Indianapolis. Eli Lilly is based here, the pharmaceutical company. So I imagine there's a lunchroom over at Eli Lilly, and a bunch of scientists in white lab coats are sitting at tables, in the lunchroom. And here's this table of people, of scientists who work on this drug. And here's this table of scientists over here that work on this other drug. And at some point, they're all talking about what they're working on. And somebody at one table overhears something that the other scientists are talking about. And it becomes an aha moment. Wow, what if we took that idea and applied it to what we're working on here? And it's that near adjacency. Literal in that, physical near adjacency in that case, but it's that near adjacency, and that is usually where the innovations come from. And I think over the course of my career, I've been really good at that. It's like recognizing, okay, before we hit record, you were talking about my Build Your Brand course that I created. That Build Your Brand course is is branding for AEC, and it's based on Southwest Airlines and other organizations, right? What they do, and taking a look at how these big corporations do their branding, do their marketing, do their business development, and how, the group that was created for, how they can take those lessons and apply them over there. And I think that really kind of defines my career is, okay, what do I see that's going on, and how can I bring that back? Because at the end of the day, if we keep doing things the way we've always done it, we have no competitive advantage. When I talk to my clients right now, they'll talk about technology. Of course, AI will come up. There's all this discussion about this technology, that technology. They'll complain because they don't have a very high adoption rate, which is true. How do you convince your people to adopt this new technology where their Excel spreadsheets have worked for them just fine the last 20 years? So the real competitive advantage is to say, okay, how do we take this, in this case, technology, how do we take this and apply it? One, back to the idea of cultural growth or culture of growth. How do we apply it in a way that makes the lives of our people better, their work better, their work day better, all of those things? And then how do we take it and apply it in a way that makes our clients' lives better? That's the competitive advantage. What do we do with this? It's the people piece. And so I often talk, for myself about my focus on the intersection between the human and the technology. And of course, a lot of that right now is AI-driven technology. But what's happening at that intersection that's going to give us a competitive advantage? Because our competitors have the same access to the same technology. We may be developing something in-house. They have the ability to develop something similar in their house as well. So where is that intersection? Because that's where the competitive advantage is going to come from.
How should architectural construction firm owner think about building this competitive advantage in growing the business compared to the traditional way of operating a firm?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing I would do, and when I spent a couple years running a startup incubator, and we focused very heavily on early stage startups, so often pre-seed startups. So they have no revenue, basically. They've got an idea. There's a problem that they're trying to solve. They're just trying to build a business around this problem that needs to be solved and a solution that they're developing. And so we'd focus very heavily on customer discovery, very, very heavily on customer discovery. And I do this the same way with my graduate students. I run my graduate class as an incubator as well. And I think firm leaders should take a page out of that playbook, because they can go. And I encouraged, back at the beginning of COVID, one of the things that I encouraged a lot of the people I was consulting with at the time was, it's like, hey, you need to hire somebody. Most people are going, we need to lay people off. We don't know what's happening. The economy may crash, things like that. And I said, no, you need to hire somebody. You need to hire somebody that is going to talk with all of your past clients, all of your current clients, and all of your prospective clients. And this isn't a sales call. This is basically, it's a customer discovery call. Hey, what went well for you? What do we do that made your life better? What do we do that made your life worse? What is just fact-finding mission? What is it? Because you have that kind of conversation, and eventually what comes out of that is we start to learn what our clients value. We start to learn where they see value in what we provide for them. And then we can start to say, okay, where else do you, client, see that we can provide value for you? What's missing here? And, I've heard this in live events that I've hosted over the last couple of years. Owner side, client side saying, hey, it's great that you have this design. It's great that you bring us this knowledge about what it's going to cost to build, but what about what it's going to cost to operate, or, things like that. Those are the lessons we need to learn in AEC, is say, okay, where are the new places? Because it's all changing. I've done this talk for years called Commodity Is as Commodity Does. It's more relevant today than it ever has been before. Things are changing at such a rapid pace that our clients are starting to see value in new places. And the question is, how do we meet them there? How do we use the tools that we have available? And one of those tools being our ability to think creatively, our ability to think critically, our ability to create. How do we use those tools to provide value where it's never been provided before? And that's where the competitive advantage is going to come from.
From your observation of seeing AEC startups trying to sell it to architecture and construction firm owners, what's a common mistake they make about, and how can they work on to increase the adoption or distribution of their products?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the most common mistake is thinking that anybody, I think we can all agree, right? This industry is a conservative industry. It is a difficult industry. There are big players, the Autodesk, the Procores, there are legacy players in the industry that are providing software solutions, most of which people in this industry love to hate on. It's like we're forced to use this and we hate it because they're not responsive. This is just the common conversation. It doesn't even matter which company we're talking about, or which architect or engineer or contractor we're talking about. This is just a common storyline, right? It's a conservative industry. There is so much because this is the way we've always done it. This is such a prevailing attitude, which is ultimately will lead to our demise if we don't change that. But there's another aspect of the industry that I think is often overlooked, and I'll get to my actual answer here in a second, but it's a project-based industry. I remember when I graduated from school, I got my first job. I worked on this project that had been in the office for more than 2 years. And I worked at that firm for, I think, almost 3 years. So now we're talking about a 5-year span or 6-year span, something like that. They worked on that project on and off. It wasn't a constant thing, but they worked on that project for several more years after that, and I don't think it was constructed for several years after that. So the lifeline of that project, the lifespan of that project, was probably 10 or 15 years. That's an extreme example of a timeline, but even in a project that let's just say it takes a year to design it and maybe another year to construct it or something like that, you can't change tools in the middle of that project. Right? You don't say, hey, we've got a new project management system 9 months into a project. You can't do that. So adoption has to be phased. It has to be project-based. There are different ways we have to look at it. And for all of those reasons, if you're a startup founder and you say, hey, we've created this new solution that's going to get rid of the Excel spreadsheet, you're making a giant assumption that anyone in that firm actually wants to get rid of the Excel spreadsheet, right? You say, oh, it saves you this, it has these bells and whistles, it does all of those. You better get really good at the sales and marketing side, the emotional side of sales and marketing, and say, how does this make them feel? What problem does this actually solve for them? Because they're super attached to every single formula that they have baked into that Excel spreadsheet. And I hear this all the time about cost estimators. These cost estimators, these are the old guys that are they're my age. They look an awful lot like me, et cetera. They've been doing this forever, and they've got these spreadsheets where they've kept their data forever. And there's a lot of startup founders that go, "My gosh, we could take the data," and you could, but you got to convince these people
Mm-hmm.
somehow that what you're doing here is going to make their life better than continuing to use this Excel spreadsheet that they've been using for the last 25 years. So that's a pretty uphill battle, and we can't ignore that, right? We can't ignore that reality.
If you were to start a company today, a product or a startup, what are some problems you would tackle?
I think there's something that sticks in my mind. I used to do a lot of multifamily work when I was still on the design side. And I did design, and then I went through a couple of different iterations of design, build, develop as startups. And one of the things that stuck with me, and for all the architects out there, here's your free pro practice lesson today. You need to learn the economics that your client faces. Right. If you don't know what a pro forma is, if you don't thoroughly understand your client's pro forma, and you may say, hey, well, we do single family custom residential. Those clients don't call that a pro forma. They may call it a budget, but they still have one, right? It includes the cost to construct, it includes the cost to design, it includes the cost to finance and operate, and all of those things. So you need to understand those things. But one of the things that surprised me when I first learned this on the multifamily side, because I always wondered, like, okay, we're working for this multifamily developer, and the minute they sign the contract, or go, 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 you've got to get this done, deadline, 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 deadline. It's like, why in the world, right? They have had their entire life to plan for this. Why all of a sudden on this day did the switch flip, and now they're just hammering on the timeline? Well, it's because of financing. It's because they closed on the land, and their interest carry at that point in the project, their interest carry is probably their largest liability on their pro forma of anything else. And so the faster they get there, the less they're incurring in interest charges, which, of course, that gets passed along to hopefully to profitability and things like that. So I think some of the biggest questions right now are, or maybe biggest areas that we can attack, are speed to decision, due diligence. I don't think, I think people are iterating on design, generative design, things like that. That kind of bores me. But I think, how do we help owners make decisions faster is totally legitimate. I think if we're going to look at things like generative design, say, okay, it's not really about generative design. It's about informing us on how this project can be more successful. Not from a design point of view per se in terms of the aesthetics, but in terms of the unit mix, if it's multifamily, the pricing of units, et cetera. I think those are ways that we can think about the design team and the construction team providing new value to, or different value to owners, if the owner hasn't already sucked that, into their house. Which I think is going to be a big question going forward as well. But I think there's a lot, just economically, in the idea of how fast can we make good decisions, and how clean can we make this? Construction delays are costly. The amount of time it takes to make a decision, right? All that timeline, all of those things are very, very costly. I'm not so interested in a design team doing things cheaper for an owner. I'm more interested in, how do you do it better in a way that provides new value to that owner, right? Because otherwise, if we think about it in the other way, it's commoditization, and it shouldn't be, right? The design professionals should be the trusted advisors. How do you, as a design professional, continue in that role with all the tools that are out there that maybe legitimately, or you may think, are threatening your profession?
There's so many threads. I was curious to know how 1 to 20% architecture firm versus 21 to 200 versus 200 plus should think about technology adoption.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And this comes up all the time, right? When we're talking about the business of professional services, you get to a point in size, in size in terms of number of people, where it becomes modular. So, there's all this debate, is it 30 people, is it 50 people, is it 100 people, whatever. But at some point, and you see this reflected maybe in architecture firms that have a studio for this and a studio for that. And, this office has these studios and this office. So I think you get to a certain point where that modularity comes into play and we can just start repeating things. But then, ERPs and things that are, umbrella technology that's pulling all these things together, not only are different, what's the word I want, are different tasks, our project management versus financial management versus something else, but then also, this team, that team, the other. It would be easy to say that the 1 to 20 firm, right, having theoretically more flexibility, the ability to be more fluid, that they would have certain advantages, and they might, but they also don't have the resources necessarily, financial resources. Maybe they can make it up on the manpower side or effort side. But I think ultimately we have to look at a couple of things. It's efficiency, certainly. How can we make this 1 to 20 person firm more efficient? There are probably some things we can do here with some tools. Can we get, again, I think no matter the size of the firm, I think it's a cultural question. And there are some out there, certainly, that like to pretend that we work in vacuums that say, well, if you've got this firm and these people aren't willing to adopt, they're slow to adopt, then maybe they shouldn't be there. Okay, that's an interesting point, but that's thinking in a vacuum, right? That's not reality. Because if you say, hey, we've got this 500-person firm and we've got all these engineers that have been here 20 years and they don't want to adopt this, we should let them all go. No, you can't, right? There's one, you can't replace them, right? There's so much industry knowledge, there's so much organizational knowledge, all those things that need to be passed on, to the next generation. I mean, these people are going to retire at some point anyway, but you can't just say, hey, they don't belong here. You can't replace them. You can't replace them fast enough to just let them go, right? So that's not a thing. Really do believe it becomes a cultural thing. And that's why I focus on this intersection of human and technology is how do we develop this culture? And it's going to go all the way back to growth mindset, right? Carol Dweck and her team at Stanford that coined the terms growth mindset and fixed mindset. How do we encourage people out of that fixed mindset into a growth mindset to say, okay, this is what we do today. This is how we are today. This is how I work today. And I have the ability to grow, to learn, to increase or change my skill set. How do we get people in that mindset versus this is the way we've always done it? I think that's the real key. And then once we start establishing that as a culture, finding the people that are fitting into that, then we can start to answer some of these other questions. What are the tools that we bring in? If we've got that growth mindset, it's much easier to get people to adopt those tools. And we can start looking at, okay, great, we've got this tool. How does this make our engineers or our architects or our construction managers work and or lives better? And then how do they see, or where are areas that they see, and they can say, hey, we could do this and that would be better for our clients. Let's implement that. But I really believe it has to come from this cultural point of view. We can't just say, hey, great, we've got this new technology, these new shiny objects, and this is going to change everything. Not in an existing firm. I mean, maybe you create a new firm, right? And you attack it from that direction, but it's very hard to think that we're gonna come in and which is an argument that people make, when they're talking about disruption. Is the industry going to be disrupted from the inside? No, probably not. It's going to be from, threats, I suppose we could call it that, from the outside that are willing to say, hey, here's a different way that this could be done, and we're all on board with doing it this different way. We're not attached to the way we've always done it. We're brand new. So the impetus on the the inside of the industry is how do we change the culture of what we're doing in a way that says we're willing maybe even to disrupt ourselves at this point. And I know there are people out there that are saying, hey, that's not even enough, from inside the industry to say it that way. But I mean, I think that's realistic right now and maybe it's a race. Maybe it's a race against maybe it's a race against the people from the outside, the threats from the outside that are coming in. But realistically, right now, if we're trying to improve the industry from the inside, we're going to have to look at it in this way.
I want to do a rapid fire round before we wrap up. You have 10 seconds max to answer it, and you got to keep it super brief.
Okay, that's going to be a challenge for me. My role model?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's a great question. I'm going to say that one of my role models is somebody I turn to all the time is Gary Vaynerchuk. I love the way that he thinks differently and throws wrenches into everything.
Your favorite architecture building?
My favorite architecture building, that's a tough one. I lived a lot of my life in the Chicago area, walking past Frank Lloyd Wright projects all the time. And so Unity Temple is something I walked past on the way to the train station to and from every day. So maybe I start there, but I also love Calatrava's stuff.
Okay. Your favorite restaurant?
My favorite restaurant right now is a local Mediterranean restaurant that I can walk to. It's called The Med.
Any book which made a big impact in your life?
Okay, for a book that had a big impact on my life, there's a lot of them, obviously. I'm gonna say right now, I'm gonna say for a book that's had a big impact on on my life right now, I'm gonna say The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. One, because one of the things that she says is the reason that some artists are known and some aren't is because they had the audacity to put their work out there. And the other is the what does she call it? The morning pages, which I think is a great practice to have.
What is one thing most people don't know about you but would be surprised to know?
Oh, that's a hard one. One thing most people don't know about me that they'd be, well, all right, I'll go with this. I try to make it to between 5 and 7 yoga classes a week.
Best piece of advice you have received till date?
Best piece of advice I ever received. I think the best piece of advice, and I've given this to my kids, I'll give this advice to anybody. And this has become sort of a cliche as well, right? You're at the end of the day, the only thing that you have when everything else has burned down around you, right? In a really extreme example, the only thing that you have is your own character and your own integrity. And so those are the most important things that you have.
3 words your girlfriend would describe you as?
Oh, probably empathetic, connected, and home. I know she would say that one.
All right, Jeff, anything which we didn't cover in this interview and you would like to end on that note?
I think, well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for this conversation. Thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. I always love connecting with you and paying attention to what you're doing, and it's fantastic. And so keep it up. Besides apologies for the dogs, if the dogs make it to the final cut, I really do believe, and I said this earlier, that what I'm doing now is really a culmination of everything that I've been doing my entire career. I did some reflecting on that recently, and I went, yeah, this is why it's working. This is why it feels right, is because it's all of these things coming together. And I think that you touched on a little bit with the question, the idea of building community. The more that we're connected, the more that we connect with other people, right? It's this human aspect of who we are and what we do. There's going to be plenty of talk, plenty of focus, plenty of investment on AI and other technologies. And at the end of the day, the more that we lean into that, and it's not to discount any of that, but the more that we lean into that, into those technologies and those tools and the apps and everything else, the more desire there's going to be to separate ourselves from that, to find things that are made by hand, that to connect with real live human beings in real physical places. And I don't think any of this is any surprise to anybody. And so I think the question is always, when it comes to, I've used the term value proposition about 170 times, I think, in our conversation, but coming back to that, when it comes to what we value, I believe it's always going to be, how do we use what we have to create something? And this was the same answer before the internet, but how do we use what we have to create something that our clients, our customers, whatever we call those people, find as valuable. Professional services that architects, engineers, construction managers, et cetera, therapists, doctors, attorneys, accountants, professional services expands out, is all about how do we make somebody's life better. That life may literally be life. It may be their business. It may be some, how we educate kids, whatever it is, but how do we use what we have to make life better for the people that we serve? And I don't think that has changed in my lifetime. I don't think it's going to change in my lifetime or beyond. And so that's why I'm really, really leaning into that now. We've got such an emphasis on the technology and innovation, which we need to have. And in order for it to not commoditize, not further commoditize us, we really need to look at the impact of it. And that's a human thing. It's not a numbers thing. It's not a spreadsheet thing. It's a human thing. So that's where I'm coming at it from. And so obviously for that reason, I think it's the most important thing for us to focus on.
Amazing. Thanks a lot, Jeff, for your time for doing this.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. I appreciate the invite.